Welcome back to another episode of Spiritual Teachers Podcast. With me today is Spencer, calling in from Mount Shasta, California. Spencer also goes by JunkDNA. He's a metaphysicist, a channeler, and a Law of One initiate. His work explores consciousness, human potential, and the deeper layers of reality. He co-creates the Quantum Light with his wife out of Mount Shasta, where they offer spiritual retreats, Law of One tutoring, and meditative sonic experiences. He's also an electronic music producer and the founder of Star Bloom, which is a festival of consciousness. It's such an honor to have you on today, Spencer. Welcome on, brother.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, this has been something I've been looking forward to immensely. And I just want to give a little shout out to Chance, 5D Consciousness. Really good to connect and have all of that soul family activation as well. Really grateful to kickstart this and see where we go.
Absolutely, man. Big shout out to 5D, man. Thanks for connecting me and Spencer. I'm really excited for this episode today. We got some really amazing topics. We're going to talk about metaphysics of junk DNA. We're going to talk about the Law of One. We're going to talk about embodiment of higher frequency, spiritual mastery, and alchemy. So I'm stoked. I'm really stoked.
Gonna go deep. So if you want to take any notes, definitely this is the time to do it.
Cool. Let's do it. So, Spencer, I'd love to invite you to share how your awakening journey started and evolved. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, I'll kind of keep this brief just because it's the shared experience we've heard so many times over from all of us having that mutual happening. But I was at a point in my life where it was almost rock bottom for me. You know, many call it the dark night of the soul. And it was this point where the masculine aspect of my mind just wanted to piece together reality. So there were so many facets of the thought process of why do we exist? What's the purpose? And it became so overwhelming to the point where one night I was working a graveyard shift at the hospital. I was atop the parking structure with like at 3 a.m. in the morning. And I had this overwhelming affirmation that was just pouring through me emotionally, physically. And so I internally and out, externally said, I just want to know. It was one of the most powerful affirmations. And in that moment, there was this incredible solace of just peace that washed over me, like waves of love and light is the only way I can describe it.
Mm-hmm.
And my eyes scanned the horizon, which was just taking in the whole macrocosm, looking at the stars. And I fixed upon this beautiful constellation, which I've known before, I've come to know as the Pleiades, this beautiful conglomeration of light and seeing that in my mission, my purpose. But when I connected to this, there was almost like an immediacy of just peace, like inner stillness.
Yeah.
And so I felt the best way I can describe it is I felt like I was being hugged on every cell of my being, like in a way you've never been comforted before. Tears flowing, just really getting into it. And it was just this overwhelming, like, release, a full surrender into just being like at peace. So I finished off work for the next few hours, went home, slept. And then this is where it really enhanced is I had a very vivid dream state with Thoth. And this is a being that I've known before as, in hieroglyphs and things of the sort. But it was a beautiful moment where I still remember it vividly today. There's just this open expanse, almost like a cloud-like floor, just white everywhere. And this being manifested, it just kind of like materialized, came closer to me without saying a single word from its mouth, its beak, whatever, the ibis. It spoke telepathically to me. And he said, we'll be working together by putting a hand on my shoulder, and then just kind of drifted and dissolved into the background. And it was one of those like transcendental, experiences that just sticks with you.
Mm-hmm.
And remarkably, the next few days, weeks, and months now turned into years. I was fully activated in that request to the universe. Remember that I just want to know affirmation. catalyzed my claircognizance, which is inner knowing for anybody who isn't familiar with that term.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these things, all of these concepts became known intimately. It was like I would have a thought and it would be answered like instantaneously. It was really interesting, but
Mm-hmm.
not just like a yes or a no. It was like a full, like laid out briefing paired with vision. It was really cool. And so I got everything that I needed from that experience. I wanted to live on this planet. I wanted to be part of the mission. I wanted to, really anchor this. The trouble is nobody wanted to hear it, family, friends, until I had that connecting moment with a very close coworker of mine who was an older gentleman who brought me back to a grounded state by listening. And that's all it takes, is because he started comparing his 70 some years of life experience, understanding, connecting the dots. And that was the first moment when it was truly received, that all that information was actually received. And so I started easing into this. I created JunkDNA basically on Instagram as an archive, because when you have all of this flowing through you like a rush, you kind of wonder, is like, is this gonna stop soon? Is this am I gonna, like, is the tap gonna be cut off?
Mm-hmm.
But instead of like allowing that, I said, no, I'm just gonna like put it here. I'm gonna place it somewhere tangible. That way I can always come back to it and remember these moments.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that. I laid it out, and all of a sudden there was a community that I found, which I now know as the conscious community, beautiful gathering of these souls that we are speaking to now. And there was resonance, there was shared experience, there was reflection, there was understanding. And that was the point to really anchor in my own mind that I was supposed to be teaching, I was supposed to be guiding, and basically, as I coin, translating the cosmos. That's basically the essence of my service. But it has been a wild ride. We've been doing this for about 10 years now, and I'm really, really grateful for everybody that I've come across, including yourself. And there's still so much left on this ascension process. I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you.
Amazing, amazing, man. I'm really curious how long you've been living in Mount Shasta and what brought you there.
So, interestingly enough, like it tied into a story, I was basically visiting every vacation I got while working at the hospital. I would just come up here to breathe from LA.
Mm,
So there was solo trips, and when I met my wife, and it was this beautiful understanding that she simultaneously, without us knowing each other, was taking that voyage herself. She was coming all the way from Santiago and visiting Shasta. So we were in parallel our journey. And
love it.
it got to the point where, we started to like think, okay, we're going to settle down somewhere. Where is it going to be? And it was almost like an instant Mount Shasta. Of course it's Mount Shasta.
Hmm.
And we've come out here. We've been here for about, officially planted, 3.5 years. So extremely grateful. We're setting up a sanctuary, fully flowing as our company, the Quantum Light. And it's a beautiful ode to service, because having her as the feminine frame, me as the masculine, we come into this divine union, not only with our own process, but to teach and to guide. And fortunately enough, we can transcend the language barrier because she's bilingual. So we have the full Rosetta Stone of consciousness that we can mutually share at the same time.
What language does she speak?
She speaks Spanish, many other languages, French, Italian, but mainly Spanish. So we have that bilingual community that
Amazing.
we try to show that even though you're from different parts of the world, there is just one single truth that we can all, resemble in.
Absolutely. Man, that's amazing. I'm sure you've had some pretty far out experiences out there because for those people that don't know, Mount Shasta is the known as the root chakra of the planet, right?
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's one of those things where it kind of ties into my legacy and my own lineage through my regressions that I've had with Lemuria and that migration effort, the sanctuary that was sought in the surrounding regions, one of those being Mount Shasta. but it is the root chakra. I mean, it's what's incredible here is when you're within the toroidal field of the mountain, you can truly feel everything amplified. So
Hmm.
that's the good, bad, and ugly. However you want to, alchemize that.
Yeah.
But that's the truth is like being here is such an enhanced experience. And the stars, you have a billion star view every night. It's gorgeous, It's and then I know you've been here too. If that's what I wanted to know more about. You said you met your partner here as well.
Yeah, yeah. I've been visiting Mount Shasta since 2020 every year except for last year I didn't go. And I met my partner at the highest campground at the very top of the mountain, the Bunny Flats.
Yeah,
No,
Bunny
not Bunny
Flat.
Flats. What's the Panther
Oh, you're
Meadows?
talking
Panther
Skibo.
Meadows.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I was just camping with some friends, and my partner, my now partner, she came over and was like, "Hey, I'm gonna do a gong bath
Hmm.
down at our camp, which was like on the other side of the hill." And I was like, "I think I have the exact same gong as you in my car."
Oh,
And
that's
I
cool.
just taught a Kundalini yoga class on the lake over there. I forgot the name of the big lake there. Is it?
Yeah, we have many lakes. We have Lake Siskiyou, we have Castle Lake, we
Yeah,
have
it's Lake Siskiyou. Yeah.
yeah,
And and so I was like, "All right, do you want me to also help out on the other side with the gong?" And she was
yeah,
like, "Let's do it." So
that's cool.
we met in service, and then we found out we had all the same offerings, and her mom lived 10 minutes from me in San Diego, and all these alignments that, were very synchronistic. And
That's
very
beautiful.
shortly afterwards, a few months after, we were like, my rent was going up in San Diego, and she was like, "Well, if we're gonna do this relationship, we might as well just go for it." So she's like, "You want to come move in with me in Las Vegas?" And I was like, "All right,
There it
let's
is.
do it."
There it is.
It's not the ideal place for me. I want to be in the woods, but I was like, I guess this is where spirit wants me to be. So at
It's
least in
shared
this
mission, isn't it? I mean, that's why I find like the entanglement so fascinating coming together and everything that you do expands in reach. So I have no doubt in my mind that the podcast is manifested from that,
Oh,
it's
for
beautiful.
sure. Yeah, she was a big inspiration for that, and it all started here in Vegas. So
Nice.
it's been a journey, and it's been really cool. So yeah, I'm really excited to hear about your, like, let's deep dive into junk DNA. I mean,
Absolutely.
that's fascinating for me. I think I told you on the phone when I was in fifth grade, both my parents were molecular biologists,
Yeah.
and so as a fifth grader, we had a project, like a science project, and we got to choose, like, you could make a volcano or you could do whatever you wanted, really. And my parents were like, "All right, let's make a DNA strand." And,
Nice.
you know, and I remember we had these like metal rods, and we bent them into shape and put some clay on it so that you could really see it. I made this like neon booklet. So DNA, that has been very present throughout my whole life. So I'm
Yeah.
really curious about what your research has been with junk DNA.
Yeah, so I'll just get the initial manifestation of the name. That this was all about basically I knew like I wasn't trying to build a community at the time that I was doing it, but I said, you know what, let's do something cryptic, let's do something that if somebody would read it, it would immediately make them question their own reality. So when you put junk DNA, it starts to kind of like put people in a space where they have to think, I'm not a piece of junk, or I'm not like worthless. What is he talking about? And it also highlights the importance of DNA. So I want to begin probably with the science, the element, just to kind of balance, because as I mentioned to you prior, we like to live in the world of metaphysics, where you kind of blend spirituality, science, and you meet in the middle so that there's a commonality, because there's beautiful experiences on both sides of the spectrum, but to share that soul like singularity is the most important thing. So
Yeah.
junk DNA was more or less coined back in the 1970s. It was just basically saying that like only 2% of DNA was like coding for proteins, right? So you have 98% of the DNA strand that is just, quote unquote junk. It isn't active, it isn't doing anything. And this was back in the 70s, right? So there's
Right.
been like advancements in science. They found that there's gene regulation, that there's like non-coding RNA and genomic stability, but that's just the biology. The
Hmm.
true nature of like DNA is light, and light is information. So I basically see junk DNA as the reflection of the unexpressed intelligence that we activate through awareness. So this is all about like it ties so deeply into consciousness. And that's why, when you come in to this life, when you incarnate, you are basically encoded. You have a part of you that will continue to open. It's like if you put it in the phrasing of like a video game, it's like levels that you haven't reached yet
Hmm.
because you have to get through level 1, level 2, level 3.
You got to unlock
So
it.
you have to unlock it. It's just, a different land, a different space. And the beauty is the universe is so intelligent, source consciousness to basically not prevent premature growth. So you have to do the work. And this will tie in later in our conversation about mastery. But the more that you can prove to the universe, to yourself, that you're ready to have a new experience by integrating the old lessons, that's when your DNA quite literally unlocks the hidden potential, the latent facets of it.
Hmm.
So it's beautiful. It's basically like the DNA functions as an antenna, it functions as a code, and everything is just activated through your own self alignment and awareness.
Yeah.
And we can go so much deeper into this. I mean, there's concepts of the 12 strand, etc. But something that's important to realize too is that because DNA is light and the light is within you, you're quite literally a being of light. Everything that we are experiencing in the physical world is quite literally impressing upon our physicality.
Yeah.
So like for example, I've been following the sun for quite a long time, as people have come to know. That was one of the biggest things I did, which I was tracking the Schumann resonance. And the whole purpose of doing that is when you understand that in this solar system, we're basically, each planet is in a nest, and the warm, light that sustains us and nurtures us is the sun, is
Hmm.
soul.
Yeah.
So soul light is directed throughout the solar system in a way that is activating. And this is the big revelation that I found, which is when the sun emits like CMEs, like the solar flares, it's not random, expulsion of energy or plasma. When you're looking at a top down perspective of the solar system, because of the spin, the gravitational pull, when it releases an arm and all of that radiation, all of that light energy starts to move throughout the solar system, it always has an intended target, which is really incredible and trippy to think about, that the sun is quite literally extending its reach in its own circumnavigating way, where every place is meant to receive the energy, the light, everything that it's meant to. So I see this as a direct correlation between DNA activation, DNA evolution, and the light codes that are coming in from our home star. So I wanted to fit that in there as well because it's so impactful, especially when you start to wonder, why are we even able to perceive the stars, the macrocosm, space? It's for that reason exactly.
Yeah, man. Something you said was really impactful. I think I mentioned this maybe on one other podcast, but for the first time a few months ago, I was able to experience what light codes actually looked like. And it was really fascinating. It was a lot of sacred geometry. It was a lot of, there was like animals embedded in the sacred geometry, like different power animals. I saw a deer and a buffalo and other things like that. And the way you just phrased it, how the sun extends an arm and it's got a very specific target in mind. I think that's fascinating to think about, and it's a different perspective than I've thought about, and it makes a lot of sense because the sun is a living being. Every planet is a living being. We call Earth Pachamama or Mama Gaia, right? And
Yeah.
so the sun is also alive, and I think that what it really is not what most people like think it is, like we're taught in school. I
Yeah.
think the sun isn't just like a bunch of hot flowing magma and radiation and all this kind of stuff. I think it's hard to say, right? It's hard to
Yeah.
say, but I think that I believe that everything is alive, right? And
Yeah.
has a consciousness, and I believe that planets for sure have consciousness, and the sun is definitely alive. And it fascinates me to see those, videos where they zoom out and they're like, the sun is here, and then they show the next biggest sun and the next biggest sun
Hmm.
and the next, and it's like one of the largest suns, what we would call a sun, right,
Yeah.
is like millions of times bigger than our sun,
Yep. Yeah.
and that just is so hard to fathom for me,
It is. And you know what's fascinating? Just recently, the scientists are publishing new studies where they say scientists speculate that the Earth might be a living being. And I'm like, well, we got there in the end. It's like
We're finally getting
it took you
there.
guys a while, but I'm glad that we all made it to the party.
Yeah.
No, what's so fascinating is it's like when the celestial beings, I really like to put them in the celestial range because what's fascinating is that yes, we are on this planet that has consented to hosting, facilitating collectives of life and souls. And that's the whole purpose. And their transcendental evolution changes into stars, stars into galaxies, galaxies into superclusters. It just gets so massive. But coming back locally, there's so much love, It's like everything that we can experience, as illusory as this dimension, this density may be, we can still have so much gratitude for just being bathed in this light consistently, and also to have that mother father figure that is nurturing our evolution. That's how I see it, and I think it's a beautiful surrender to the process and how that goes. But light codes, as you mentioned, they are geometrical. I mean, there is so much hyper geometry that's fixed into light that allows you almost to get like a through the looking glass effect where you get to
Mhm.
see higher realms and you get to see what that geometry evolves into, because the platonic solids, the things that we can tangibly understand with our physical expression that we see in the world, the natural world, is just like the beginnings of that. It's so hyperdimensional, and it's beautiful to know that everything, geometry, physicality, life experience, all of it ties into consciousness. So consciousness is that bonding agent. And I think that's where I really focus on mostly, is just tuning in to expanding your consciousness, to enhancing it, and also to understand what it is in general.
Yeah, for sure. And as you were speaking, it made me think about how there's most likely a direct correlation between a Kundalini awakening that a lot of people are having and the sun, because when I had mine, it felt like an energy shooting up my spine, and I wasn't doing any practices at that time, right?
Yeah.
And besides eating really clean and like praying and those kind of things, and doing a little bit of yoga, but not much, doing a lot of art, that kind of thing, but nothing like really, really intense like a Kundalini yoga now. But I would say that, that shooting of that energy, it reminds me of lightning or of the energy of the sun, you know,
Of course.
and it's like lightning almost from my perspective feels like the energy of the sun in a very condensed, quick experience, you know?
Well, it's powerful, even the lightning metaphor, because lightning travels upward, even though it appears downward. So it's
Hmm.
this beautiful understanding of like a rising energy, and that's exactly what it is. I mean, there's this constant spiritual gravitational pull to bring us from our shallow selves that we begin with to expand us into our ultimate potential, and that's all about, choosing through free will that experience. And it's okay, some people won't, and that's the beauty of it, is to know that you're meant to have your personalized viewpoint, experience, perspective of reality. Simultaneously others will have theirs.
Yeah.
So that's where we'll leave that, but that's perfect.
Yeah, and I think the way that we can tie it in is that these light codes, there's an activation happening of the DNA. And it's like every time we're experiencing these light codes, and from my perspective, they're different depending on where I'm at on the planet as well.
Exactly, yeah.
I've had some really powerful ones in Maine. I've had some amazing ones in Mount Shasta and in the desert. I mean, they're everywhere, right? But and you can receive them just in your backyard or just going
Yeah,
outside, which is the
yeah.
beauty of it, you know. But those are activating something in the DNA, and at certain levels of our expansion and as a collective, the mass awakening is the sun is beaming down certain codes, and it reminds me of the crop circles, right? Where the aliens
Yeah.
are planting seeds for us to learn, and a lot of it is toroidal. Pretty much
Hmm.
everything is toroidal, and how there's so much sacred geometry and balance, right? Like everything that they've like real crop circles, not man-made, have been very, very balanced, right?
Yeah.
Like every side balances out the other side.
Oh,
And
the symmetry is incredible.
yeah,
And what's important to mention is that sunlight is information and the body responds to light because you have biophotons. So everything is correlative. And I think that, especially given the environment, you want to go to a pure, clean weather environment to really absorb and receive. And the best place to do that is nature, not necessarily full on cityscapes, but the more natural you can get to receive, the more your information you're going to get. And I've met people who have activated their light language simply by being in the presence of light. And it's this really beautiful, like extraordinary experience to witness, but it just flows through them. And I think every single download is specifically designed and curated for you.
hmm,
So you could be right next to somebody and they'll have a different experience, but that's perfect because you both receive what you need. So I love it.
yeah, yeah, for sure, yeah. And light language is another really interesting topic that there's a lot of people on Instagram now channeling light language, right? And
Yeah.
and some people bash on it. Some people don't think that it's real or that some of it might sound like gibberish or some people may be faking it, right? But I think that the way to differentiate when it's real light language versus something that somebody's just
Yeah.
making up is the feeling that the individual
Exactly.
listening receives, right?
Yeah.
And I had a teacher in San Diego who I think she spoke over 1,000 light languages, she told me one time. And I remember she was doing a sound bath, and I was laying there, and she started speaking this light language, and I just started bawling, just
Yeah.
instant tears. And it felt like the mer people
Of course.
language. And when I went up to her afterwards and I said, "Do you know which language it was at that moment, and she was like, "Yeah, it was the Mer people." And I was
Oh,
like,
that's cool.
"Wow, okay, this is confirmation." And in that moment, it was like I got taken back into an experience in this body of receiving a language that I was able to communicate in
Hmm.
potentially underwater, right? Like that was just more of like, like dolphins. They speak in a very different way than we
Yeah.
do. And it was profound. It just deeply touched my soul. And yeah, have you ever had an experience like that?
Well, it's beautiful because it's embedded in your Akash, you know. And
Right.
I think the beauty is that the multidimensionality of light language is the fact that it all corresponds to resonance. So there's a deep understanding. This is actually, I'm really glad this came up because this is a concept I've been trying to relay, which is everybody like for example, whether it's a piece of art that is channeled as, light codes, light language, because light language takes many different modalities. It could be sung, it could be spoken, it could be written, it could be drawn,
Hmm.
it could be danced. It's incredible. There's so many things. And I actually, in my own way, I use my own light code activations to create music. So I'm in that realm of modality, but I've
Nice.
seen specifically on the receiving end when I hear or I feel this resonance, it has a direct message for me. So it's almost like if you're in like the same room with somebody who just begins channeling light language, you receive a very specific code. And it's not that that code has to be known by every single person in the room. It's just what you're meant to receive. So that's the transcendental experience with light language, is that it delivers a message to you,
Hmm.
and it's a perfect message that is only designed for you. So I just love how holographic this kind of community and this communion is with our greater soul. It's coming in, as I mentioned, it's part of your memory, your DNA cellular memory that is coming through from all of your past life experiences to show you that the dialect that you speak now is very shallow in comparison to what you actually truly know at your core.
For
So,
sure.
what we can do while preserving the illusion, the free will mystery, is simply to allow a language that sounds, quote unquote, like gibberish or, confused speech, and allow that to be the carrier wave back into your own harmonic resonance. So, if this is the first time you're hearing anything like this, or you yourself want to channel light language, it's not merely a force, it's a flow.
Hmm.
So there's going to be both sides of the spectrum, of course, but it's just realizing that true light language will be felt, as you said. I think it's absolutely the best way to encapsulate it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And a- as you were speaking, it made me think that light language is kind of the bridge from speech as we know it to telepathy. It's kind
Yeah,
of that in between,
the gateway.
right?
Yeah.
Where it's like telepathy, sometimes when I've experienced it, when I'm really clear and grounded and centered, when I've experienced telepathy, I've actually experienced it a few times in Mount Shasta. And when I've experienced telepathy, it's the reason I say it's kind of a bridge to that is that in with telepathy, these messages come in that sometimes the monkey mind is like, is this real? You know,
Yeah.
is this actually what that being is communicating to me, right? And I say that being because I've had telepathic communication with Sasquatches up in Mount Shasta. And so that's how they communicate
Yeah.
primarily. That they do certain sounds, but the telepathy is their main form of communication.
Actually, that's a perfect point because, like, even with hyperdimensional beings, it's basically the entire animal kingdom and the plant kingdom too, and the crystalline kingdom. Everything kind of communicates through thought. And
Hmm.
I think that's where the intro to relations begin.
Hmm.
It's only humans, as you said, the monkey mind, that is so focused and anxious and hyper fixated on needing an external source. But the
Hmm.
truth, yeah, we communicate mind to mind. That's the most beautiful, unifying element between us all. So that's incredible. Yeah, and it, I see a correlation between both of those things, light language and telepathy, because it's the inner knowing. It's that instant like connection that I think is the part that really transcends language.
Yeah.
And unless you're willing to like listen, there's gonna be a blockade. So I think, if after this podcast, if you guys want to go out and experience true telepathy, true light language, you just have to sit in the stillness and feel more than you actually hear.
Yeah. Yeah. Listening more than speaking.
Exactly.
Much more, much more listening. Yeah, and it's interesting when it gets activated for me, you know. Most of the time it's in nature, and most of the time it's when I'm really relaxed and very much so in my the opposite of the fight or flight, right? The parasympathetic. So it's it's amazing when it comes through, and sometimes I'm like, I wish I could be doing this more often, but
Yeah.
at the same time I'm like it happens when it needs to happen, you know?
Exactly. The ebb and flow, you find that perfect balance. That's why, like, especially when I was in LA and I needed, quote unquote, to breathe, that was just instinctively my urge to ground, to be back in my own self.
Hmm.
So I feel that absolutely.
Well, I want to wrap up the DNA conversation because I feel like we started it, and you mentioned the 12-stranded DNA, and I'm really curious about what your thoughts are on that and how you feel we're evolving into that with the different star children coming in. So a lot of them are already here on the
Yeah.
planet, and what it means, you know, what does it actually mean, you know, like from a scientific approach when we're looking at a DNA strand in a very, you know, complex microscope, most of the time we're not seeing that, right? Like we're not seeing
Yeah.
any of these genetic mutations of the 12 strands, but so much of the conscious community talk about it and how it's evolving into that. And so I'm so curious about your research with that and where we are with it as a society.
Absolutely. So essentially, from a biological standpoint, DNA, and this is kind of like the part that nobody really wants to hear, but it has to be said, which is our physicality has been tampered with, our genome. Many people hear the concept of telomeres, right? So the expanded versions of our lifespan, essentially,
Hmm.
and that somehow or another, thousands of years ago, they were capped for whatever reason. You can go into that secondary conversation, but yeah, we were basically limited from our potential to live elongated lifetimes. And
Hmm.
I think that was intentional too, not in a nefarious, malicious way, but more so like because of the lack of growth as you go. Because I want everybody to really fix on this concept here. Imagine living for 500 years only to awaken in the last decade. What do you do with that remainder of time? It's almost wasted time. So I believe that by whatever means, and there's been many conversations about this, the limitation of our DNA serves a double purpose. It serves to accelerate and rapidly expand that consciousness to evolve so that you don't just spend an entire lifetime waiting for that moment of awakening, but you can rather have it as soon as possible, i.e., within an 80-year time span.
Hmm.
But more so when we're talking about the 12th strand, I think it's more holographic than that. So it's like the part of you that is you right now, you already have the full base model of your DNA, but as we said that, there are certain levels that are restricted. So as you start to expand your DNA into a quote unquote 12 strand model, it's not necessarily going to be a physical phenomena. So that's the trouble, is like we want to, see under the microscope that we're changing and we're evolving, but everything has to do with consciousness.
Hmm.
So that's the confirmation I think everybody's looking for, is like, I want to be, mutated. I want to be super powered and all these kind of things. We really are limitless in that
Yeah.
design. But the model expands beyond the two strand, or, even expanded versions of that. But it's all about diving into a more in-depth level of awareness. So we begin life in survival mode, then we slowly activate our intuition, and hopefully the goal is to return to unity. So it's that slow evolutionary progression that actually follows the enhancement and activation of the DNA. So it's fascinating. I mean, I it's incredible because, like, when we talk about unlocking your DNA, or having light codes activating your DNA, what's truly happening is you're basically unlocking the aspects of yourself that have been limited from the start of your birth. So, like, for example, myself having the activation of my claircognizance, and for others, their visions, their sight, their subtle energy resonance, that all comes from an enhancement or augmentation of the DNA itself.
Hmm.
So, I'm not trying to burst anyone's bubble by saying that I don't believe that we're going to have biologically mutated DNA. I think our DNA is already perfect, and that it's basically just or an unraveling, a revealing of that which has been hidden.
Hmm.
And that's the beautiful thing. I mean, DNA is resilient. It survives in space. We see it on plenty of meteorites that have plummeted to the earth. It's remarkable. And then you start to get into a deeper concept, which is star family, galactic origins, and that's a whole different episode there, but I just
Hmm.
wanted to tie in and wrap the DNA conversation off there.
Yeah, and I think like what you mentioned that the DNA has been tampered with, from your research and that kind of thing, what do you think it was the Anunnaki? Do you think it was other extraterrestrials that
Yeah.
came here and spliced our DNA with chimpanzees, or what do you think it was?
There was a seeding on this planet, and it was roughly around the time of Lemuria that is transitioned to Atlantis, to ancient Egypt, etc. The whole world was terraformed with life. I think the most important thing, I mean, because we can go into that conversation about who did it, who done it, but I think the most important thing, as I mentioned earlier, is that for whatever reason they did it, it actually served a positive purpose, which is a rapid acceleration and continuation of your evolutionary journey without wasting time.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, I think I'm just going to leave it there. I don't really want to like create any like confirmations about who did it. I have my own thoughts and theories and ideas, but I basically want to see the grander picture, which is, now that we have our DNA tampered with, augmented, tapped out, what do we do with that? What's the important thing to focus on? And I think the most important thing to realize is that you are here on this planet for a limited time with limited resources. Make the most of it and tune into your consciousness, because that's how you can truly resolve the blockage and even jump over that hurdle, is that you're not limited by any means. And the more aware you become, the more activated your consciousness and evolved your being. So, yeah.
Yeah, like a final point I want to make with this is that I'm so curious what if there's any physical shift in the DNA from somebody who has had an awakening versus somebody who hasn't. you
Oh, I'm
know?
absolutely sure of it. Yeah, yeah. I think the biggest thing is that we're not going to see like grand mutations.
Right.
But there's probably more light, there's probably more strengthening of like the integrity of the DNA itself, maybe more vibrancy,
Hmm.
as far as like what it can withstand or intake compared to somebody who's dormant. But at the same time, it's a choice. I think it's beautiful. Everybody has this limited experience in physicality, make the most of it. And here we are as a spiritual community, knowing and trusting and tuning into this and accelerating beyond anybody's fixed perception. I think it's beautiful.
One thing that I thought about is that I felt my intelligence, my cognizance, my like overall capabilities to like navigate through this reality, everything got amplified after the awakening. It was
Yeah,
like if my IQ was tested, it would have jumped like
exactly.
really tremendously, And I'm curious, did you experience something like that?
Oh, of course. Yeah, you
Hmm.
you start to analyze life in a different way. I think perception really matters. It's like, for example, when you're attempting to connect the all, like trying to understand creation, it makes it so much more tangible, the teachings that we received in grade school as far as like geometry, because everything is built upon that platform. So now that I've had that basis, if I zoom back, gosh, like 15, 20 years ago, there wouldn't be an understanding, but now there is. And that connecting factor allows me to appreciate life in such a greater way,
Hmm.
and that everything that exists. So I believe cognition, intelligence is intertwined in that evolution as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the awakening is part of the unlocking
Mm-hmm.
of the DNA. And then I also think that our beliefs and the deeper work, like they say, right, on self, going in and forgiving, facing the traumas, facing these ancestral programs, all that at some level is rewiring and reprogramming the DNA because that's where a lot of this is held, right?
Yeah, and what's really fascinating is that there is a memory save in the video game language as well with your growth, your progress. Like, so I've seen this happen many times over where people will have an awakening, they'll get all of these really beautiful realizations, but then it'll be almost a little too much for them and they crave the unknowing elements of unconsciousness, of societal, hierarchy, etc. And so they'll try to drift backwards. The good news is that your progress is saved. So it's
Okay.
not it's not like if you happen to relapse or go back into an unconscious state of being that you can't return. It's simply like a pausing of the game
Hmm.
that you can always return and come back to that. But again, at the same time, it's like, why would you? Why would you want to forget? Why would you want to not remember everything that you've experienced? Because these confirmations, as you said, when you have telepathy, when you have telepathic contact, you're not going to forget that. You're
Hmm.
going to try. I mean, some people try to shut it away, but it's always there, and that's why the DNA holds that saved progress. So it preserves it really until you're ready to come back.
Hmm.
Some people will leave this lifetime having, paused the game, and others will kind of follow this wave, this tide oscillation back into that rhythm. And that's perfect. I think, you know, we can't go an entire lifetime being absolutely perfect, absolutely spiritual, but we can continuously flow back into that essence just by resuming where we left off.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what's really interesting is my friends that are really financially stable created that stability before their awakening, the majority of them.
Yeah.
Or I'll watch their frequency kind of shift, get get that financial stability going again, and then they come back. It's kind of like a
Yeah.
pendulum. And it there's very few people that I know that have been financially successful and really deep in their spiritual practice after their awakening. And I'm
Exactly.
curious what I mean, it's all frequency, and money is made up by people. And so there's a different level at the higher frequencies, I believe, where there's an abundance that just comes without money, and I think that
Yeah.
that's where the new earth is heading, and that's why so many spiritual people have a difficult time with finances, I think.
Yeah, the true nature is inner peace, right? That's the wealth. But I completely understand what you're saying. I mean, we live in a society that is, predicated upon having certain resources, certain obligations, responsibilities, and that does tether the progress, the growth, because everything is mind, right? So if you're focused on something to an extent that is overwhelmingly taking you away from the moment, either focusing on the past or the future, then you're not going to be fully centered in the present. That's
Mhm.
just the objective reality. And so I think it's beautiful that life shares its catalyst, that all of these moments, the hardships, the undertakings really do have a resolve at the end of it. Like there's always a better moment ahead that will continuously surprise you and bring you back to center. It's just about a choice to return. And so when speaking about the spiritual community, you don't have to hover in this field all the time. I think it's a beautiful place to meditate, ground, and find home, find solace. But at the same time, there is a world out there that you need to be part of, and it's almost like a non-negotiable at a certain point. So I completely understand and sympathize with people who are going through these hardships and just need to step away or have that fluctuation within their vibration just to survive. I
Mhm.
completely understand that.
Yeah.
The 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 important part about this is that rather than remaining in that lower frequency, as long as something comes about or you can truly, and this is a cheat code for anybody that's wondering, if you go to nature, your answers will be resolved. I promise you that. You'll get clarity on any single problem or fixation of mind that is you're struggling with or you're wrestling with.
Mhm.
Just go to nature and it'll be resolved. But outside of that, as long as you don't make the low vibration your new home, and you can remember, that's why meditation is super important to calibrate the mind, body, and spirit.
Mhm.
You have to remember, and the best way to remember is to join communities like this, to listen to podcasts like this, because it's like it revitalizes you. It brings
Yeah.
you back that vigor, that energy that you had at your awakening. And some
Yeah.
people, especially experiencing burnout, can kind of fall off the tracks here. And when you have somebody else that is just as energized, we share that sympathetic resonance, don't we? We energize each other through our own presence.
Big
So
time. Yeah.
it's beautiful. It is.
No, it's true. I mean, even the videos that we watch, like the little clips on Instagram, can shift, like micro shift our frequency, depending on what we're watching. Like the other day, I got this clip, and I don't even know if it's real or if it's AI, but it was Kanye West, and he was sitting in the pews of the church with Michael Jackson and X and Tupac and another guy, and it like it felt heavy. It was like, even though these men had a huge impact on society with their music, that particular video felt heavy frequency wise to me. And afterwards, just watching it for like, 15, 20 seconds, I could feel my frequency shift. And so it brings it back to the importance of energetic hygiene, right?
Exactly.
And like, as well as meditation, there's other tools. Like I work with Hape, which is a tobacco snuff from the Amazon, to really clear my energy and to feel what it's like to be in my center and in my energy, you know. There's a lot of different tools, breath works, you know.
Absolutely.
What have been some of the tools that have been most beneficial for you and to clear your energy and really bring yourself back when you feel these things?
Yeah, it's you just have to remember. I think the biggest thing is like going back to those moments that started your whole spiritual journey.
Hmm.
And so one of the biggest modalities, something that my wife and I actually produce and we've created experiences for, which is bilocation. Bilocation is a beautiful thing because rather than having an intimate experience that you're meant to make for yourself in the quiet of meditation, bilocation expands upon that like an amusement ride. You just sit back, relax, and or you know basically drawn into experience that is curated by someone else.
Hmm.
So you don't have to think. You can melt away and you can go into those experiences. One of the most powerful ones that I found that was at the beginning of my experience was a guy named Joe T Labs. He's on YouTube, and I had this beautiful experience with the higher self because I was just drifted and guided. So if anybody's looking for supplementation and enhancement, especially when they don't necessarily feel themselves or in the right energy, highly recommend bilocation as a good starter. But if you are feeling good, you're just slightly ungrounded, meditation is perfect. Breath work, as you mentioned, just returning to the rhythm of the universe. And then grounding. I mean, this is probably the easiest, cleanest, non thought worthy process, which is you just go out into nature, you feel the earth through the soles of your feet, you receive the negative ions, you dip your feet into the water, however you want to experience the wild. I think letting that in is the easiest way to come back to. And trees, too, are so powerful, these beings. They really are master alchemists. They can take anything that you're carrying and dilute it. And it's a phenomenal experience. But yeah, I would definitely lean back into breath work, meditation, nature, some of the easiest. But then even on like the day to day, just tune into the right content. As you said, vibrational hygiene.
Hmm.
It's really all about that. What you receive will become you. So if it's not that you have to be learning all the time, but just tune into like happiness, a positive energy. And sometimes that could be as silly as just watching like dumb, animal videos.
Hmm.
And that in itself, the purity that comes through those beings will absolutely align you in a positive way. So this isn't like a hardcore thing. It's just realizing being self-aware to when you feel off balance versus when you feel at pure stasis.
Hmm. And you mentioned biolocation. Can you describe it for people that are unfamiliar with it? Are you using sound bowls? Are you using different frequencies online? What
Yeah.
what does the experience look like with your wife?
So bilocation is something that you naturally do when you rest, you sleep, you kind of drift off into a different place, a different space. And it's easier when you sleep because there's zero resistance. But when you're doing it consciously or semi-awake in a semi-conscious state, uh, it's basically just like a tour guide of the cosmos or any realm that you wish to go to.
Hmm.
So the way that we facilitate, we create all of our own music. I compose the musical side of it. We use 432 hertz tuning, so everything is
Nice.
curated for your own cellular recalibration.
And
But
432 hertz is the frequency of the planet.
yeah, it's the proper tuning of nature.
Hmm.
And we, as unfortunately, as much as we love music, most music out there is tuned to 440. There's nothing
Right.
wrong about it, but if you want something that's absolutely aligned with the planet, with your own biocode, 432 is it. So we create these experiences and more or less in a group setting. Sometimes it could be a one-on-one, but we'll begin with a simple breath work invocation as we did for this podcast previously, and just getting into the vibrational mindset that we're going to be entering a benevolent field of energy.
Mhm.
And from that point, it can go any which way. The beauty in bilocation is it's not scripted. So every time that we launch, announce, or do anything, it's all channeled material. We are just as tuned in as you are, eyes closed, consciousness open, and we kind of like flow into that direction. But just to relay some of the experiences we've had, we've gone to the center of the sun, which has been a really powerful, incredible moment. We've gone into the depths of the earth, into the crystalline kingdom, the subterranean experience. It's remarkable where you can go and what you're not limited to. So that's why when we allow ourselves to release, and specifically either being the experiencer or having experiencers, you can just let everything happen for you. And what's beautiful is that a lot of people don't realize that they're much more clairvoyant than they give themselves credit for.
Mm-hmm.
Like every time we do a bilocation or a session that resembles this in any kind, we open the microphones, we open the videos to see, and we've done this in person and virtually, but we just get that live feedback. We see what people experience, what they saw, and it's remarkable how far out you really can get. So I highly recommend that. But we host that. We actually have something like that coming up later this year that we're going to be announcing.
Nice.
It's best both ways. I mean, we've done sound bowls before. We've done virtual instruments. We've done pre-recorded tracks. Everything can happen, and every experience is unique and aligned. But the most important element of that isn't necessarily the music per se. It's what's flowing through informationally and the direction by which the group travels in at the same time.
Okay, so it sounds like a sound meditation journey to me to a certain location, right? With the
Absolutely.
intention of the group to go there, right?
Directional, yeah. So
Okay.
we all go together, but mind you, I've had ones where basically I break off from the group
Yeah, I was gonna
per
ask
se.
about stragglers if somebody's like, oh, I want to go see this instead.
I break off from the group, not intentionally, but it was actually a spontaneous regression. That was the first regression I had about Lemuria, where it was this, oh my gosh, a very traumatic experience that I was witnessing the cataclysm of Lemuria. But we're peacefully going to Avalon, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh well, actually you're going to go somewhere else. We have a different plan for you right now because your mind is open. We're going to use this moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so anything can happen. I think that's the beauty. Like, you can really sense the magic and the mysticism of just being in that headspace.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, can you describe a little bit of that? What did happen to Lemuria that you witnessed?
Yeah, so I've had two regressions. The first one, which I just mentioned, there was this incredible, unfortunate happening where the tectonic plates of Lemuria, this ancient civilization within the Pacific Ocean, suddenly submerged due to the shifting plates and basically swallowed everything into the ocean. It was this really horrible. I mean, I wouldn't impress this upon anyone, but I had this immediate sorrow and sadness. And from that moment when I was like fully processing, because I was one of the survivors, I was probably like late youth, like just about to shift into the 20s or so. And after I was like really processing it and crying, and we like shored onto an island that wasn't surrounded because it was like part of the mountaintops that survived. I was just there on the beachfront, just like looking at nothingness. It's hard to imagine just like how it was very sensory for me. There was a lot of noise as far as like nature, animals, birds, etc. And then everything just going to like an eerie stillness, a quiet. And so there was just so much sorrow. But then as I was processing that in the same regression, two by two in light body, all of these familial faces that I had known were coming out of the ocean in pair and walking, placing their Lemurian crystal at my feet and putting their hands on my shoulders, smiling. So in that moment, it kind of showed me that life is eternal. That there's no need to take anything for face value. I mean, we're just bodies for the moment. The
Mm-hmm.
real piloting force is consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
But I got that piece of like, it was like demise to life,
Mm-hmm.
and it was this really cool transition. And it wasn't an ideal regression at all. But then my wife, who actually hosts QHHT, if you're familiar with that, quantum hypnosis, we have our own take on it. We call it something else, and we infuse crystals. But ideally, when I went into that session, I had more of the peaceful revelations that I was a teacher, I was a guide to the youth in Lemuria. So I was a masculine in that lifetime, but I was teaching, and basically the regression opened with me walking and leading, like in a little like line, like a group of kids behind me that just received their Lemurian quartz, and it was just glowing and beating at their heartbeat, and we were walking towards this enormous, like probably 3 times the size of the Pyramid of Giza, like a semi-translucent crystalline pyramid.
Mm-hmm.
And this might actually be a good tie-in too with the Law of One, because
Mm-hmm.
but we were going there for a specific thing, and what I found that specific thing was an initiation. So, and we could talk about Law of One in a moment, but even beyond that, I found that within Lemuria there was a very peaceful community. There was one that we all shared meals together, we all shared intelligence, everybody was cognizant of the spiritual process, so there was no ambiguity or delay in your own growth. It happened from the moment of birth. You were instantly taught that you were meant to excel, succeed, and evolve through this process.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would follow that until, of course, I was on the tail end of that civilization and the unfortunate happened. So there's so much here to unpack, but the beautiful thing about it is that regression of Lemuria allowed me to tether in the succession as far as like a chronological expression. So I saw the ending of Lemuria, the beginning of Atlantis, and then that transition from Atlantean wisdom into ancient Kemet, which is Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
So there's so much here, but that's just scratching the surface.
Yeah, before we transition to Law of One, because that's also loaded, I think I'm really curious about whether or not in those regressions you saw the types of beings that were on Lemuria. Because I know in Atlantis there was at least 4 different types of, humanoid beings. They had grays, they had, 2 other forms of humanoids that look different from us, right?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is like Lemuria specifically was seeded and tended to by the Pleiadians. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason that I've come to that realization is we just had a recent retreat to Kauai. And from Kauai, we went to the Pleiadian portal that was on the island. And the island is only an island because it's a resemblance and manifestation of the ancient Lemuria. So what I saw basically was a very coherent, healthy group of individuals as far as like Lemurians go. Like if you can imagine the peak physical expression of men and women and children all expressed, very natural, semi-indigenous, but there was like flowing garments. It wasn't necessarily like loincloths or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
It was very mature in its expression, and I believe that was an influence from the Pleiadians. But basically, they were seeding that higher dimensional wisdom, and so there was moments when you saw like a mixing of the groups, but specifically, it was only Lemurians and Pleiadians at that moment. And it's fascinating too. This is actually a good moment to just have a secondary thought here, which is the main grouping of benevolent energies in our local space time. They all share a commonality, and that's to serve others, to
Mm-hmm.
be a force of light. And that includes Arcturians, Pleiadians, the whole Lyrans, every other faction that you can think of actually makes up a greater faction of a unified field, and
Mm-hmm.
they're all sharing that energy. So even beyond this planet, every planet that we can fully conceive of within the third density, everything in our local peripheral is actually being planted in and supported and nurtured by these beings. And that's just simply to expand and excite the potential of these civilizations that are destined for greatness, but only can happen if they're aware of who they are. And so that's the trouble, that's the hurdle to get over. But yeah, it was beautiful. The memories, the visions I had, I wish I was an artist. I would have painted everything, but it's all up here. So that's all I can express it as, and then share my visions. Yeah.
Did you ever go into Telos
And to
with
tell us,
these
I don't
things?
even see, that's the thing, is like my regression basically ended with like with that island that I landed upon, one of the tops of the mountains that we just kind of like fleed to for safety. I don't remember anything beyond that. I mean, I'm sure there's a third regression cooking up in the works somewhere soon. It's just gonna knock me back. But yeah, that's a beautiful thing. It's talked about in Law of One that in the surrounding territories, specifically here in Northern California, that there was a migration, a sanctuary sought by these beings, the survivors that wanted to live and truly experience, but also preserve and protect the light. So that's something that you're going to hear a lot about when you come to Mount Shasta or research about it, is Telos, the city of light. And it's more or less a subterranean colony. And there's just the remembrance, the preservation of the wisdom that continues on. No, I don't remember. To answer your question, I didn't get that far into the memory book, but I hope to someday soon.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm curious if you guys ever take a journey with the group into Telos and what that's like for everyone. That would be really fascinating.
Yeah, I'll keep you updated. I mean, right now we connect at a distance. Like we go to Ski Bowl, which is the highest point on the mountain that you can go without actually trekking onto it.
On
And
Mount
they
Shasta?
on Mount Shasta, yeah. So if you're
Uh-huh.
if you're trying to get as high up onto the mountain by a car, that's where you get. Panther Meadow is probably one of the most powerful places to really connect.
Hmm.
And what we sense is that through telepathic range, we can contact, speak, communicate, but also have that crystalline presence join us virtually. And so there's so many things that are happening here. I would love to go deeper. I would love to just open that floodgate of information. But until then, I respectfully hover within the field and share the space with them as well.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So I want to dive into the Law of One, but before we do, I'm so curious, like, what are some of your most far out experiences living on Mount Shasta? Have you had a Bigfoot encounter? Because I love Bigfoot. I have an episode just on him and my experiences on Mount Shasta of me just sharing about that. Yeah, would you be open to
Well,
sharing like some of your
yes.
far out experiences
So
there?
that's the thing. I mean, I think one of the most mystical moments I had wasn't necessarily in Shasta. It was actually down, I'm trying to remember, it was Lake Arrowhead, I think. But it was like somewhere in that area, like further south in California. And it was this one moment where we're in this cabin, just quiet. I mean, it's like absolutely on acreage. There's nobody around, absolutely still, silent, no wind, nothing like that. And so we're on the back deck, and I have this really interesting moment where I'm sitting on the cover of a hot tub, and it's probably like 5 a.m. in the morning, super early. And there was this point where, like, I can't even describe it. It was like basically the best way to even put it into words is that I had my one of the most powerful encounters with the Pleiadians that I've had since my awakening. And it was this like, because I could hear something, and I was like, it was like a high pitch, and then I turned to my friend and I said, "Can you hear that?" And they said, "Hear what?" And like right as they said, "Hear what?" It was so weird because I was like hunched over, I was just relaxing. My whole body like straightens out. I feel like a pouring of energy that's coming directly over me, just like bathing me in light and pure love is what it really felt like, streams of love.
Mm-hmm.
And it was it was so funny. It was like the Pleiadians, my star family, were just like reorienting me to be more proper. So
Mm-hmm.
they anchored my body. I like fully like accepted the masculine frame.
Mm-hmm.
And once I was in that position, there was an inner voice like that was speaking to me that said, make the noise. And this is a noise that, just due to the sanctity of the experience, I won't actually like repeat it here, but it's like a bird noise that I can make with my throat. And when I started like doing it, because it was just like intuitive, I was just like, yeah, I'm gonna do this. So I do it. All of a sudden, within the trees above us, there's something, because there's nothing out there. There's no birds, there's nothing. Everything is like clear enough to see, but there's nothing. Something up there that's like invisible starts to like repeat that sound back to me. And I was like, well, that was weird, you know? And so like I give it a second and I do it again and it repeats it back entirely verbatim. And so I start like changing the tonality, the rhythm, and it follows that same rhythm. And it's like one of those things where people are like, okay, well, you could be visualizing something, whatever, but it became very physical when this thing jumped to another branch. And mind you, there's nothing on the branches, and startled the leaves, and the leaves fell. And I was just like, what is going on? And my friend was just like jaw dropped. He was like, what is happening? And
Mm-hmm.
so I kept the communication. I was walking closer, and I had my husky at the time who was like looking like intensely at the branch, even though there was nothing on the branch. And so there was this like really close encounter. And this is something that I refer to as the elementals. So like beings that are just beyond the veil that still exist within the physical, but like in a higher frequency.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, again, this could tie into the Sasquatch that you were speaking on.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was this moment where it just kept happening. And I was just like, this is so strange. And it even like scared my husky, because like there was a point in the communion, the conversation, where it came close. And the only way I can describe it is kind of was like a space lemur. That's what I saw in my mind eye. It was just like something that was super agile within like the trees and everything, but it jumped in front of us, and like there was like leaves just like rusted in front of like the deck that just like moved. So I was like, there was something there, and it was
Wow.
absolutely fascinating. But what I received intuitively, because while this is all happening, while we're making the outward voices, the noises, there was this inner speech communion that I was having with this being that was basically describing itself as the elemental, that it was protecting this part of the forest, and that it sensed that I was a like peaceful energy. That's why it approached. And it was just like this, it was more of an introduction of itself to me, so that I can like see that, yeah, you shouldn't be so focused on physical things. There's so much more that exists out there. And so that was a beautiful moment that I would just love to share. I haven't really talked about that fully publicly, so that's pretty cool that that came out.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And then another thing just recently happened within Medicine Lake, which is just slightly north of California. And it was on my 33rd solar return. So this is a big year for me, as far as like activation, purpose, mission.
Mm-hmm.
I was there, and the Silica Waters, I was just standing, feeding the water. And it was this point, because it was absolutely still, there was nobody there. It was such a rare like solitude type moment. And that's when I connected the closest with the sun. I was like a direct portal, consciousness to consciousness, forehead to forehead. It was powerful.
Wow.
And yeah, those have been my most mystical encounters. As far as here in Mount Shasta, my goodness, are there light ships every single night? Almost there are ships overhead. And
Mm-hmm.
it's become so common that we just kind of like smile and wave. It's not like a, oh my gosh, look at that, kind of experience anymore. We're so much in the knowing that they just are here because there's a peaceful energy to Mount Shasta, and they
Mm-hmm.
don't feel like necessarily confined. But we've seen, like, I'll never forget, there was this moment when we were in Montague, which is just slightly north of Mount Shasta. Beautiful panoramic view of Mount Shasta at the night. and we saw this huge ball of light just appear behind the mountain, like huge, like it probably the size of like a marble at a distance,
Hmm.
just appear. And then like it hovered above the mountain, and then in a split moment it just shot up, like just like out of that
Mm.
instantly into nothing. And my wife and I were the only ones to see it while everybody else was, kumbaya with the guitars and singing and everything like that. But
Hmm.
you constantly see them in cloud craft that they camouflage in. This is actually a really cool semi thought as well, which is when you're looking into UFOs or interstellar vehicles, most of the time to preserve the mystery and again your own free will, they'll actually camouflage within natural setting. So this can be in a variety of different things. They can camouflage as rock, they can camouflage as clouds, and it's all about resonance, what you feel when you're in their presence. That's how you know what's really happening here.
Hmm.
But yeah, some incredible experience. We're so grateful to have this be our home base, and it's every day is mystical, but it's really when we can share that experience with others that I think is a beautiful moment that we can do. Yeah.
For sure. For sure. Thanks for sharing those stories. They're really amazing. I've seen some videos of that being that you're mentioning that can go invisible and
Yeah.
jumps on trees, and I've seen a few of those on YouTube and other platforms, and yeah, it, I don't know if I don't to me it almost feels like a separate being from the Sasquatch.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. It's like so and the beautiful thing is it's talked about in Law of One as well, the whole phenomena of Sasquatch. But yeah, they all have their own purpose and own mission, right? Specifically, this one was meant to just ensure that the energies were proper. Even like I think it went into like this kind of like semi story about how it's still healing from the past forest fires it experienced and all this kind of stuff. So it's very
Mm,
environmental,
hmm.
as in contrast to Sasquatch, which is more of like a traveler, like a being that is both physical and non-physical in a
Hmm.
beautiful way. So yeah, there's beautiful reflections on both ends. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. What do they say in the Law of One about the Sasquatch?
Well, I mean that's a whole story in and of itself, but yeah, it's basically that they are kind of like the crossbreed between the fourth and the fifth. So they're here in a way that is slightly animalistic in their appearance, but more so higher consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
It's this very strange, like if you could imagine, because the gradual evolution of consciousness goes from the plant kingdom to the animal kingdom to the human kingdom, right? So we or just in general bipedal fixed figure, that's the natural progression. But there's a certain circumstance that mentions that some of these Bigfoot or Sasquatch are actually ancestral remnants of Maldek, the destroyed world, and that they reincarnated on in their local space-time here on Gaia to simply fulfill that experience. But there's also other explanations that they are serving a grander purpose of like harmonizing the planet and also harmonizing civilization. They're they're here, they're not here, they're all at once. And I think that's a beautiful thing that nobody can get the satisfaction of hunting a Bigfoot. It's like it's one of those things that you can't be controlled. It's just this beautiful force of nature that continues to exist. And hearing your experiences, it sounds like you've had very benevolent encounters as well, which tends to their polarization too, that they're of the light as well.
Well, they showed me that they're shapeshifters and they can turn into any animal that they want.
That's beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Masters. I mean, that's really because they're that it's such an interesting, complex consciousness. And so, of course, in that state, it can be in any which way. I mean, that's how you kind of evade detection, isn't it? To be the whole of the animal kingdom.
Hmm.
So I love that. That's the first time I've heard of that too.
Yeah, it was really interesting because my buddy was camping at the Red Fir campground, and this was my first time on the mountain, and he had an experience this, like either the night that I did or like one or two nights before or after, because we met up later on, and he had shared how he heard the huge footsteps, undeniable, like just something massive. Him and his buddies were sitting around the fire and they're just waiting for this giant creature to appear, and then a deer appears, you know. And then I've been part of retreats down at the base of the mountain, more like closer to the town,
Yeah.
and we built an altar for the Sasquatch, and put some apples, and it was very simple, right? And then after we made it, a deer just appears, and the energy's felt by the group that it's not a deer energy. And so it's been really interesting to experience that. And I had encounters with three different ones. So I had an encounter with a like an adolescent that was around my age in their lifespan, his sister, which was a little bit older, and then an adult male who was like the guardian of the mountain.
You know what's so fascinating about this is the timing of it too, because there's a movie coming out by Steven Spielberg called Disclosure Day, which is all
Mm.
about extraterrestrial disclosure. And the main two figures within the trailers and the whole premise are a deer and an avian bird. So it makes you wonder how much truth actually seeps through cinematic vision. Because
Hmm.
we've seen Avatar, we understand that there is a major emphasis on trying to shake the collective back into the realization of all these things. So when you were speaking all that, just brought me back to that instant memory. But that's exactly it. Benevolent beings that are of service, that are peaceful, and actually conceal their identity. I'm sure if we were in a different civilization or society that was more or less resembling that of Lemuria, that there would be no need to conceal, hide, or really watch their surroundings. But given human nature, I completely understand the precaution.
Well, there's so many tribes in the Northwest US and up into Canada, that have had it's just on their totem poles. The
Yeah,
Bigfoot is on their totem poles. It's another creature that lives, on the land, and they have all sorts of stories with different encounters. And I think they're like people in the sense that there's good ones that are more benevolent, and there's other ones that are more tricksters or like to be curious. You can see the same thing in orangutans or chimpanzees. You're gonna have the ones that are a little more aggressive. You're gonna have the ones that are more docile and calm. And the guardian energy that I experienced, he was very prominent, right? Like very much like, what are you doing here? Why are you here? I'm here to make sure that nobody's going to be destroying the land, leaving trash, all that kind of stuff. And he forced me to bow in my telepathic communication with him. He forced me to bow, and I was like, okay, this is like a huge, like maybe 10 to 12 foot being, right? That was the alpha of the alphas, and he was just like wanting to see what my energy was and why I was there. And in that telepathic state, there's no hiding, right? You
yeah,
the the communication is just instant, right? And there's no room to fake it, right? And so I was like, I'm here to clean up the land, to connect with the nature, to connect with amazing other beings and creatures and people, and he saw my purity, and
yeah.
and then he bowed back to me and he said, thank you for, for being here. And then he left. So it's, when people say they're 100% benevolent, I wouldn't necessarily say that. I think that they're just like humans. You have people that are, on the destructive path, and then you have people that are on the creative new earth energy, and everything in between, right?
Yeah, it's basically like a side branch of humanoid evolution.
Hmm.
So there's like, as the law of one describes, there's basically two types of Bigfoot. One is more or less a thought form. So again, you can consider that more of a benevolent energy.
Hmm.
And the other one is the vestigial remnant of an ancient race. So even with that, there's leftover trauma. There's still like karma to absolve, etc. So of course that could cause the the disassociation, the dissolution of like a purely positive species. But
Hmm.
it's this beautiful understanding that they're basically able to phase in and out of the astral, and that's what allows them to kind of like go in between. But they're just, living in these remote areas in their own way, having to experience. And I think your encounters are so impactful because not many people have the luxury of even coming close to that connection or acknowledgement.
Yeah.
So it's just this interdimensional part thought form being that exists because it's meant to exist, of course, but having the honor and presence is pretty remarkable. And I think everybody, the collective curiosity is what really staples their presence. Is because here in Mount Shasta, I mean, there's Bigfoot paraphernalia everywhere, but more than that, it's just you can sense that there's more to the forest than just trees and nature.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think you mentioned a previous civilization. Some of us might have lived in that, right?
exactly.
And been these types of creatures in quote unquote past lifetimes, which are really not past because there is no
Mhm.
past and future, right? It's all happening at once, which always trips me up. But, or I shouldn't say trips me up, more it fascinates me.
Yeah,
And so yeah, maybe some people are more connected with Pleiadians, some people are more connected with fairies, some people are more connected with Bigfoot. Everyone has certain beings, the ones of us that are older souls that they resonate with and connect deeper with, I believe.
an anchor. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's fascinating. All right, let's dive into the law of one more. I'm curious, you know, for people that don't know, it's a series of books, right?
Mhm.
How many books are in the series?
So there's five, but the fifth is a testimonial from the woman, Carla, who is involved in the channeling.
Okay. And there's five people that are involved in the channeling?
There's three.
Three. Okay.
There's basically Don, which is the questioner. He's the one that is the base, the premise of questioning Ra directly. There's Carla, and then there's another that is transcribing and recording the whole happening. So
Okay.
three in total for that experience.
Hmm.
This was back in the 80s, and I actually have book one here just in case anybody's seen this before.
Uh-huh.
Um, this source material, the reason why it resonates so deeply is because it's confirmative. It basically, for me in my own experience, having all of these intuitive understandings via my claircognizance and then seeing it having manifested in the 80s, it's just like, okay, well, there's something here. And
Hmm.
then as you dive in, there's an energetic of these transcriptions because it really does allow you to shatter that curiosity and give you the peace and comfort of just knowing why certain things are happening. I think that's going to be a really peaceful surrender for people who are just figuring out about Law of One. But I basically consider myself an initiate because not only have I trained and learned and connected all the dots as far as what's even considered, because the Law of One, and I just want to start here, the Law of One in general, the reason why it's called Law of One is it perfectly surmised in this quote from the book. from Ra, and this is the same Ra of Egypt. It's basically a sixth density consciousness, a collective consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And the best way to understand that in our own juxtaposition of where we are now, we're in the third dimensional plane, third density that's transitioning into the fourth. We're kind of in between this wavelength. And then through the ascension process, you go into the higher echelons of or octaves of existence. So you go from the fourth to the fifth to the sixth, etc. Ra is specifically within the sixth, where the soul becomes less of an individual kind of like outer experience and more of a conglomerate singularity.
Mm.
So from that moment, and sixth density is this beautiful density of like wisdom, and you already move through love and all of these other understandings, but from this understanding they understand saying understand a lot, but they bring forth the wisdom that is unity consciousness. So
Mm-hmm.
this is within a text, a quote within the book. It's an excerpt. Ra says, all things, all of life, all of creation is part of one original thought. In truth, there is no right or wrong. There's no polarity. All is one. And that one is love, light, light, love from the one infinite creator. And
Mm-hmm.
what's beautiful about this is that you are this God source consciousness that basically creates the divine expression of you. It's already within you.
Mm-hmm.
And so when sacred holy texts say that, when spirituality confirms this, it's basically an understanding that your own perception, your subjective viewpoint of reality, you're not just witnessing it alone, you're witnessing it as a co-creation, a part of the creator.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's this beautiful realization that Ra is trying to deliver to third density, which it's a whole story of like why it even exists on this planet, but it basically helping us understand the core concept that is learned in fifth density, but here in the now.
Mm-hmm.
Because from where they're at, when you serve, you accelerate your place in the universe. So, like for example, if you're a fifth density incarnation, if you're within that realm, the only way to actually evolve or transcend is to serve others. And sometimes that comes in a more intimate way where you extract your experience and give a part of your life force to another. Others come into the knowledge sector. And so from sixth density, Ra is attempting to evolve into a higher echelon, which happens to be the seventh, and then the seventh turning into the eighth octave, which returns back to the first. It's a very complex concept, but there's been so much power and energy that's been derived in my own life experience from these books and feeling everything that came from it. It's just, it's remarkable. And I can go on and on and on about this. That's why I teach it. That's why I host a tutoring service for anybody who finds the information, the material too complex. We break it down in real time. And yeah, just plenty of things surrounding that as well.
Yeah, I read the first book and I really resonated with it. It's been a few years, and what's interesting is one of my best friends, he really dove into it deep. Like in our men's circle every week, we were for a few months we were dissecting and really diving into it. And he shared with me how in the book or in one of the books or several of the books, they talk about how the sun is basically God, right? And so it was a really fascinating concept, and it made me want to discuss this with you where, you know, in the book they Ra is the sun god, right? R-A.
RA, yeah.
Right. And in ancient Egypt, Ra is the sun god, right? And so the sun, you know, is like we said, we had about the light codes, right? And everything that the sun downloads into our physical existence and into our physical body. And then on a side note, which I think is very connected, some people believe that water is God. because without water, we can't survive. And water carries all these codes. And depending on the water that you're drinking, it's going to affect your frequency. We're 80% water or more, right? So I'm really curious where you stand with those concepts.
Oh yeah, are you ready to go deep? Because this is going to be material I haven't covered yet with anyone. This is going to be fresh,
Let's do it.
brand new.
Let's do it.
So, as you mentioned, water is life, right? And that is absolutely true. What's important to realize is the evolution of consciousness begins as the elements. That's a missed piece of our journey. People don't realize that the soul incarnates in the elements first. So you're in the creational forces of the universe, the cosmos, and that begins through the ether, the air, the water, the earth, the fire, etc. Right?
Mhm.
So we have those moments, and it's an intangible experience. You can't describe yourself as a flame because it doesn't make any sense to us in our mind. But when you're part of the all, you realize that everything that's experienced has to be subjectively observed. So even if you're in a fixed way where you can't necessarily describe your experience outwardly, but can be visually experienced, that's exactly what's happening. It's not something that we need to focus on, but Ross speaks of this as the first density. And
Mm.
so first density is the beginning. It's our origins, it's the genesis. And so as you begin to accumulate spiritual mass simply by being, simply by offering in a very unique way your services or like your own being to others. So think about water, for example. Water nourishes, replenishes, and nurtures everything around it, right? So if you're in the form of water and you help grow a tree or build a city or sustain a life form that's, dehydrated,
Hmm.
even that simple act of service allows for your evolutionary progression. So you start to
Mm.
build up this memory, this understanding. And this isn't just localized to this world, this is every world that you can even possibly imagine, but most importantly, within third density. So this is where it's going to kind of get deep. I'm going to go slow with this, but third density, I want everyone to see as more of like an umbrella realm, right? So the first, the second, and the third all coexist within this domain. So that's why we have a physical planet. That's why we can see physical light, etc. Right? And when you transcend that beingness, you move on to second density, which again is in the form of the mineral kingdom, first and foremost. So you could become the crystalline fields, the crystals. And that's why crystals are beings of light themselves. I mean, Nikola Tesla confirmed this as well, that they are alive beings, even though we don't understand the life of a crystal, it's nevertheless alive.
Yeah.
Now, chronologically, this is where I really want to plug in to help people anchor and dive in, which is the lifespan of these forms are incredibly enormous. You couldn't even imagine how long you would have had to been something, millions of years sometimes, into the form where you are now. So, and this isn't necessarily just on Earth, this is on planets abroad, but you start to slowly accumulate spiritual mass, come closer and closer, and then the biggest leap that comes into your main evolution is when you transition into the plant kingdom, the flora. So you experience life as a blade of grass, as a tree, etc. And there are different echelons to like the higher tipping point, the realm. Like I would consider trees at like some of the highest frequencies. And so when you embody the life of a tree, you're kind of like on the precipice of transitioning into the animal kingdom, the
Hmm.
fauna.
Hmm.
And so, and then this is going to be hard to understand, but you've kind of experienced it all. There hasn't been, segmentation within your journey. And so you begin within like the most infinitesimal like cell division. You become like the actual biological part, the process. You become the like you just get bigger and bigger and bigger. Bacteria, you become part of this whole thing. Then you move into the insectual kingdom, like ants, butterflies, etc. And you start to like grow and grow and grow, and you have to be birthed from something. So from that point, all the service coming back is the bees, etc. Then you move into like larger mammals, giraffes. It's just the whole animal kingdom that you can possibly imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And this again is shared throughout the cosmos. There's different forms, but it's still nevertheless the same frequency octave. So as you start to grow and grow and grow, you get to this point, and this is why it's so beautiful to even think about beings like cats and dogs, right? Domesticated animals.
Mm-hmm.
The most important thing about that is the proximity with third density consciousness. So how are you interacting with your next evolved self? And when you have a dog, when you have a cat, you realize that they're observing, they're learning from you, and they're
Yep.
reflecting what they receive.
Yeah,
And what that is it's a training protocol.
for
They're
sure.
basically learning how to become human before they're human.
Exactly.
And so transitioning, evolving, and then all of a sudden, poop, you're a human. Great.
Mm-hmm.
Or a humanoid, whichever planet you're on. Now, this is all within the umbrella term of third density. And it's this beautiful understanding that our evolutionary journey is not even close to being finished. We just are moving beyond the threshold of the veil. And now, the reason why self awareness is such an important and crucial component is because when you're an animal, you don't necessarily have your own self awareness. You might instinctively and, react to urges or have different, pre-baked responses within your DNA or your own biological hereditary. That's the only thing, is that you can only truly accumulate and gather self-awareness in a physical vessel within the humanoid body, the bipedal figure, right? So our human imprint is basically the moment when you can start to become aware or conscious of the all. It's
What
nice
about
because
dolphins and whales?
so those are the exception. Those are the
Okay.
exception because the oceanic realm, specifically the cetaceans that you're mentioning, whales and dolphins, they actually understand their purpose. And so they're probably what I would say is like in the same offshoot branch as the Bigfoot, as we were mentioning before, as far
Yeah.
as like being beings on the planet who understand without, understanding the true mission and the purpose. That's why they're encoding the oceans, they're balancing the planet, and they're harmonizing society.
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole purpose. So they're like one of the main exceptions to that. But for the most part, everything is kind of moving through a Turanian field, like we're coming back to our understanding. So having the self-awareness only comes through an awakening, and that's where we kind of catch up to speed, spiritual awakened beings. We're now able to observe ourselves and our surroundings and use that to prompt not only your mission but also the service element, which is to be of loving service to another, or conversely, to serve the self. And that's the divide, and that's where your path really splits into two from that point. But what I
Yeah,
really
my buddy talked about that a lot. He said there's only two paths. There's the service to self, which inevitably comes back to service to
exactly.
others, because it's like service to self can only go so high and so
Yep.
far. You can only get so much power, so much
Yep.
money, so much influence, right? And then eventually it's like people are so maxed out at that they're like, okay, uh, I have it all. I thought this was where I was going to be happy and have success, and then ideally they go look deeper because they're like, okay, that's none of that Maya, the illusion
Yeah.
is satisfying me. So I'm gonna look deeper and go to creator or God or higher
Exactly.
self, whatever path they find.
Well, this is where it's fascinating. So we basically are in the beginnings of that choice. That choice is made on a daily basis on whether you're going to serve yourself, serve others. And some people justify the serving of self as serving others because you are the all, but that's a no-namer. I think the most important thing is that when you make that choice vibrationally about your mission, then you can start to see that the lesser taken path is the one that somebody dives into full distortion of the mind. So, for example, the law of one mentions one of the souls that has ascended through the negative path, the self-service path, that being Genghis Khan. So if you imagine how terrible of an impact that person, that being was on this planet, how much emphasis of that darkness, of that evil, has to actually be embodied for you to have an evolutionary jump into that field. But as I said, the lane splits into two. So basically, the beauty of Ascension is that you are oscillating and sympathizing with a resonance that is embodied within yourself. So, for example, if you're tuned into the law of one core teachings and you have that understanding of all of the previous successive topics and themes of your own evolutionary journey, then you can basically jump the gate. You don't have to necessarily go in a linear perspective of third to fourth to fifth to sixth. You can actually go over these realms. All of the realms, also, for a side note, are absolutely beautiful and vivid. There's no veiling of your mind. You're in complete cognition of where you are, how you are, and all the mystical, magical moments of reality surface. So I think that's just something to look forward to as far as that. But if you understand and integrate the higher realm teachings here in the now, then you basically align and synergize with that frequency. So you don't have to experience in redundancy all of the previous lessons. So that's just something that I'm going to put out there. But
What about
aside
somebody
from
like a Hitler? Do you think he's going back to the elements?
Hitler is in a state of confusion. So this is actually mentioned in the Law of One, where he's still in a state of healing at this moment because there's been so much distortion. This is the unfortunate part. This is something that I mentioned prior and previously in the conversation here, which is there is saved memory, right? Progress saved.
Right.
So it's not that he's going to regress backwards and start over from the beginning, because evolutionarily it doesn't make sense to discard all of the learned experience, but he will have to redo a third density vessel. He
Okay.
will have to reset and come back. And see, that's the trouble. That's why there's so much emphasis on this now moment. The Law of One speaks about cycles, and these are major natural cycles in space time where at the end of 75,000 years or so, there's a major event. And this happens periodically every 25,000 years,
Yeah.
25,900 years.
Hmm.
But there's a major harvest of souls, which is the ascension process, which allows you to go through this threshold into higher octaves of experience. So for the ones that are ready, they'll make that threshold. But the final scoot, the final, like the grand finale, is at the 75,000 year cycle end. And guess where we are presently? We're
Right
right
around
there at
that.
the tail end of that
Right.
75,000 years.
Hmm.
So this is more important than ever to make a choice. And that's why free will is paramount in, executing that. So ideally, it's not about necessarily taking a negative path, because as you said, it's a dead end loop. For the
Hmm.
ones they even mentioned, this was another being, they didn't name him specifically, but they said that he got to a sixth density evolution of self-service, which is absolute mastery of like you and only you through his own teachings.
Hmm.
And when he got to that point, he was so exhausted with being so oblivious and absurd in his understanding that we aren't all as one. So because he's been blinding that spot and only really focusing on the self, and there's no genders at that point, okay, so I'm just saying in general, but because that being chose to ignore the all is one truth, then there was a surrender by love to bring him back into that formation where every soul naturally funnels back into the light. So the truth is, it's not even recommended to even go down that path. Just choose love, choose light, choose your own sovereignty and divinity, and everything will organically flow upwards in a accelerated manner. Now, huge macrocosmic concepts. I want to get back to the original intention, which you mentioned: water, the sun, etc. So the law of one speaks on the formation of our macrocosm in a way that basically manifests from top down. So rather than things materializing and building a galaxy, the galaxy is made and is filled with matter. That's a really interesting concept that I want people to integrate, because
Mm.
they call the main galaxy as we know it, like, the millions of suns that are tucked away in here, even billions, they regard this as the logos. So that's an easy way to kind of correlate and correspond the text, the wording of the actual manifestation. So the galaxy is the logos. Within the galaxy, there are suns, the sub-logos. With around the suns, there are planets, sub-sub-logos. And then there's us, human beings, civilization, sub-sub-sub-logos. So basically, the reason I say this, and this is where it kind of ties everything together, why Ra emphasized the sun so much, and this is new content. The sun is a portal to the higher densities.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have a being of sixth density consciousness that is operating, as the law of one states, from a fifth density field, and then holographically manifesting, because they actually did come here and manifest in the bodies that are now immortalized within Egypt, within all these very interesting figures that are semi-humanoid, but also aren't because they're meant to like bring a mystical element. And there's a whole thing to that. We can go in do like a 5-hour conversation about that.
Yeah.
But the whole reason that the sun is emphasized is because that is where the energy and the intelligence is pouring through.
Mm-hmm.
That is the portal. That is the open energetics. So rather than being like a third density planetary, or like a civilization throughout the cosmos, like visitors from beyond interstellar space that come here and we see them, this is more a higher dimensional energy that is pouring through directly through the light.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very holographic. That's the only way to really describe it, and that's why there's so much emphasis on the sun. But to answer your previous assertion about either the sun being God, the water being God, everything is God.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just the modality about what is being funneled in at the time. So we are God, the elements are God, the animals, the plants, the stars, everything is a version or derivant of the one infinite creator,
Like
in
a
its own
fractal.
unique way. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the whole thing. And so when people start to wonder why were they worshiping the sun, it wasn't necessarily they were worshiping the sun directly. Remember, the people of ancient Kemet, they can only kind of work with what they can see and know.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a being, a sixth density intelligence that is manifesting through the light and holographically projecting physical bodies into the surrounding regions to teach the law of one, which is the whole emphasis and initiation of the material even entering this world, then you start to realize that the people, just as with anything else, as any other kind of worship, because it's just like an innate response, are going to look at the sun with reverence, right? So that's where the correlation between Ra and the sun came. But truthfully, Ra is basically just manifesting here through the closest available, space, which happens to be through sun bodies. And that's how that energy and the information comes through.
When you say sun bodies, is that another word for like light codes?
Information is decoded through light codes, but it's basically just like any kind of star. Any star is like the
Okay.
way that higher dimensional intelligence can enter the realm. And the thing is, it's not like they're actually like physically coming through the sun, they're like energetically moving through the sun. So
Okay.
everything is consciousness. So you have the main version of them, which exists in sixth density, and that sixth density wisdom wanting to serve others and to help a planet in need, i.e., us, because we're confused and lost and we need assistance.
Please help.
Pours that information through the fifth. The fifth dilutes it back into the third density so that we can actually have a tangible experience. And here we are today with the law of one in our lap.
Yeah. Well, man, Spencer, I feel like we're just skimming the surface. We covered a lot, but I feel like we could totally do another episode and dive deeper into some of these
Absolutely,
topics.
absolutely.
So I'd love to invite you back on again for part two and just go even deeper with this stuff. So thank you so much for joining today. It was such an honor to have you on. And then we'll connect about the next time to record and create the next one.
Yeah, thank you for facilitating this, bringing all of these beautiful souls together. We all have the shared truth in our own unique light. And I think we're just painting a mosaic of absolute. And I'm really grateful for that. If anybody wants to follow me, you can follow me on Instagram at JunkDNA
Hmm.
or my mutual page with my wife at The Quantum Light. You can see all of our offerings, retreats, sound sessions on our website, thequantumlight.us. We are having a retreat in Mount Shasta actually coming up, Star Seeds, if you want to check that out as well.
Do you
And
know,
we
do
have
you have the
some,
date for that yet?
yeah, that's coming up. Let me give you the exact date here, but it's basically combining everything that we were talking about today and bringing it to a physical space. We would love to just share this experience with all of you, but it's going to be in August. It's a
Amazing.
5-day celestial activation retreat here in Mount Shasta, California. This is where we have direct experience with Star Family, with many different things that you are seeking on the inside. We would love to share that experience with you as we have in the past. And yeah, it's just been an incredible journey thus far, being here, being alive. I think we really can't take that for granted. We need to just be absolute in our approach to the ascension process, to the journey, and trust the process all the way through. Thank you so much, Petr, for bringing me on. I appreciate it. Thank you, Chance, 5D Awakening Consciousness. Appreciate you as well.
Thank you,
And
5D.
I would love to be back. That'd be
All right.
awesome. A lot more to talk
Amazing.
about.
Yeah, and we'll drop everything in the description, all the links and everything to connect with Spencer and his wife. So, thank you so much. Until next time, brother.
All right. I'll see you soon in love and light.
Love and light.